Welcome everyone on our 96th episode under Trends Literature Series in collaboration with World Trade Center, Able Charities, and Bloomsbury. Sometimes, I really wonder, and I'm really amazed as to the number of episodes we've hosted on the trailblazing books with the brightest and the most inspiring of authors. They've been writers, politicians, journalists, academicians like Aditi today, politicians, columnists, painters, and all of them happen to have written such path-breaking and trailblazing books. And it has been absolutely enlightening to delve into the stories behind the stories. So request all of you to definitely subscribe to our channel Trends Literature Series and definitely press the bell icon so that you can get notifications on all our new episodes. And in fact, I must announce that in today's episodes, we have two giveaways of this wonderful book by Aditi, The Vow of Parvati. And you have a chance to win this book, and the fastest finger first. Yes, they are.
Our esteemed author of today is Aditi Banerjee, a practicing attorney at a Fortune 500 financial services company, an executive MBA from Columbia University, and has published several essays on Hinduism and the Hindu American experience in reputed publications. She is on the board of directors of the World Association for Vedic Studies and has presented at global conferences on matters related to Dharma.
In fact, the book we discussed today on our 96th episode, as I mentioned, is The Vow of Parvati, perhaps the only book to have delved into the mindset of Sati and Parvati as they fell in love with our god Shiva. So welcome, Aditi. We really hope to discuss and understand more on Sati, Parvati, Shiva, and your book, and you. Yes. Please unmute yourself, Aditi.
Yes, now I'm able to unmute myself. Thank you so much for having me, Neeta and Dia. I've really been looking forward to this conversation, and appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. It's a privilege, totally. So I'll delve into the conversation straight away, Aditi, that what is the inspiration behind this book and how did you really plan to write this book? And what is this vow of Parvati that you've been talking about in the book? I've read the book, but I would like to know more.
Sure. So this is actually very personal for me. In late 2019, my husband and I got married. And actually, when we were planning on where we would get married, it had always been my dream to get married at a place called Triyugi Narayan. So it's a small ancient mandir a few hours away from Kedarnath. And it is said that it is at this temple that Shiva and Parvati themselves had wed. And so the sacred fire from the yajna from their wedding ceremony still burns there today. And so my husband and I were able to take our saptapadi around that same fire. So that was a very auspicious and powerful experience for us. And also in connection with the marriage for a few years, I had done the Somvar Vrata, in honor of Shiva and Devi. And so I felt a very close connection with them. I felt a lot of gratitude for their blessings. And it was kind of like a tribute to them, and out of that gratitude and reverence that I wanted to write this book, which is really exploring the story of their love and relationship, and showing the divinity of that, but also how we as human beings can relate to that and find inspiration and wisdom from that. So because it was so meaningful to me and to my husband and myself, really just wanted to share that with the world. So it came from a very personal space. And so it was out of that I wrote this book.
You've been writing such wonderful books. In fact, The Curse of Gandhari, which I have been hearing so much about. I need to really lay my hands on it, and have been hearing such wonderful reviews about it. And even your new book, Hindu Love Stories. So congratulations once again, this wonderful book that you've written. And I'm sure it is going to enlighten a lot of people, and really nice to know your reasons for writing this book. Your books normally talk about very, very strong female protagonists. And I'm sure that attracts the readers and obviously the publishers as well. And I'm sure it inspires a lot of women, empowers them, and kind of inspires them. So, any challenges, any special challenges that you really faced in writing this book?
Yes. So, when I wrote The Curse of Gandhari, so Gandhari, of course, is a very strong, fascinating character, but she's ultimately human. This book is different because, Shiva to me is Mahadeva, Sati and Parvati are Devi, so they are divine. So it's difficult to write a book about divinity. But what I find fascinating about them is if you think about Shiva, he's the Adi Yogi, he's a renunciate. You can picture him meditating in the Himalayas, and he's a very isolationist in a way. And yet there's this other aspect of him when he's with Parvati, when he's with Sati, when he's with their children, Ganesha and Karthik, and he's a family person in a sense. And so it's this idea that you have someone like Shiva and Shakti who individually are independent, self-sufficient on their own. But when they come together, something very beautiful and harmonious and auspicious unfolds. So the very play of the universe comes from their union, from the Shiva and Shakti principle. And so it was really that I wanted to explore. So how even for the devas, love and family can bring something special and new out of them.
Absolutely. And, your book definitely talks about one of the greatest love stories ever, that of Shiva and Parvati. And it definitely continues the legacy of imagining and understanding the mythological characters. So, how does it really feel to dig out such stories? And do you think there is a lot of truth in the stories themselves, or maybe somewhere there's a thin line between fiction and the reality?
Yes. So one of the images that's my favorite of Shiva and Devi together are two of them are standing on like a mountainside, and usually you have pictures of devas are looking at each other, but in this one they're both looking out at the world side by side. And I find it very inspiring because again it goes to how each of them are complete and independent unto themselves, and that remains even after they come together. But then there's this partnership between them, and so that was really what I wanted to explore and bring out in this book. And for me, I've grown up on the stories of Shiva and Sati, so I was familiar with those incidents from their lives. But in preparing for this book, I did a very close read of the Shiva Purana, so the English translation of the Shiva Purana, and there are a lot of aspects, a lot of incidents that not all of us are familiar with, or that you see it in more detail. And so the book isn't just a summary or a retelling of what's there in the Puranas, because what I wanted to do, there is a lot of it that comes from my imagination. And so what I wanted to do was to explore this relationship, which we do understand from the Puranas, but in a way that we can relate to. So I think for a modern reader, in the ancient times in our epic literature, you just have a few lines, and from a few lines you get a whole story. But in the modern day, we like a lot more detail. So we as a reader want to experience what the characters are going through. And so I wanted to imagine, what was Sati's life like as she was growing up? What was her relationship with the other Devis, with the other Devas? And how might she have felt when she first came across Shiva and all of that, and exploring that. So their relationship with Ganesha and Karthik's relationship with each other, all of those things. And so I just wanted to create a narrative that connects all of these incidents, and that also allows for some scope for imagination. And so it is one of the things I I struggle with when writing about the Puranas or the Itihasa, which is, to me, it's not mythology, or for India, this is not really mythology. It's sacred literature, and how to honor that while also allowing for some of that creative freedom or that expression to bring it alive in new ways.
So very right. But one question which has always dwelt into my mind, and some of it definitely got clarified through your book. But do you think still, after you mentioned the whole story, and people need to read the book and then come to know, but do you also feel, I know through your book you feel the same, but are Sati and Parvati actually really the same person? And because it has been a point of discussion for such a long time, so what do you feel about it? I mean, after writing this book, I mean, you do say that they are the same person, but in reality, were they the same person?
Yes, I mean, yes, I believe so, and I think that is what's there in the Shastras. So I really see the birth of Parvati, and you talked a little about this, the vow of Parvati. So when she takes this vow that she's going to win over Shiva, I see that as the continuation of what happened between Shiva and Sati, and then we had the Daksha Yagya, this tragic seeming end to their story. But then I think it's with Parvati that it again picks up, and that's also how it's presented in the Shiva Purana. So yes, it's that same Devi in that sense.
Yeah, and I really loved various conversations in the book. I mean, between Narayana and Rudra, then with three sisters. I mean, more of friends, Sati, Lakshmi, Saraswati, and also then various encounters that you mentioned in the book between Shiv, Parvati, Shiv, Sati. So how did you really, I mean, it is so fascinating to go through the book and really hats off to your visualization. So how did you really visualize and recreate the whole scenes? You must have really enjoyed yourself writing as much as we are enjoying reading the book.
I really did, and it's that was exactly one of the things I most enjoyed, which is this relationship and interaction with the other devas and Devaloka or Swarga, where they're interacting. And I think sometimes we forget, we're so conditioned almost to think in monotheistic terms nowadays. And so I think sometimes we shy away from this idea of there being the multiplicity of devas and things like that. So to me, it was a lot of fun to imagine Sati with her, with like her sister devis, like Saraswati and Lakshmi. And of course, if you think about it metaphysically or philosophically, you would say they're all aspects of the one Devi or one Ishwara, one Ishwari. But I think that doesn't stop us from, in the more physical reality, imagining this multiplicity and these relationships. So, for example, in Diwali, when we worship Lakshmi and Ganesha together, there's also a relationship there. Or some of the interactions between Shiva and Vishnu, even though we also believe in Harihara, which is the two of them as being aspects of the same. And so for me, I think for the devas, one of our goals is to feel a connection with them. And part of that, of course, is reverence and awe. But part of it is also having this familiarity or the sense of them as family. And for me, to make their presence feel real and tangible, it is really imagining some of these interactions that they have with each other, and then it's easier for me to interact with them. And so I really wanted to bring out that I think there's a very beautiful, enjoyable, fun aspect of this that we don't that we shy away from for various reasons. And I think we have to understand that as not all of us are able to just sit in meditation and meditate upon, Shiva. Like for me, it's really through storytelling that they come alive for me. And I think it's perfectly fine to have some of that imagination and relating to them in different ways. So even though, of course, they're not human, but we as human beings seek certain human aspects to our devas so that we feel closer to them. And so part of it was playing with that.
Wonderful, wonderful. And, this is so wonderful because your passion really comes through. You are from a different background, but the way you passionately feel about Vedas and Puranas and Hinduism, you've been doing so many talks on Hinduism. Hats off to you once again. One of my first questions in the quiz is that what are the other two books which Aditi has written? The answer was already discussed some time back, but fastest finger first, and I'll give you the book. Yes, Dia, you had some questions for Aditi.
Yes. Hello, Mom. Mom, how do you feel about mythological writing, about how it is being taken in by the audience, by the readers nowadays, when there are a lot of stories going around?
Yeah, so there are a few aspects to this. So I think one is, why is this genre of writing so popular, and why is it finding such a large audience? And I think that speaks to the fact that from the most ancient of times, these stories haven't just been so even the word mythology, so the Greek word it comes from mythos, is actually a correct description of what our stories are. So mythos refers to tales or accounts that are transmitted generation to generation, that carry the beliefs and traditions of a people. And it doesn't get into whether it's true or false, but that's what mythos meant. But nowadays, when we use the word myth or mythology, it primarily means something that's false or something that didn't happen, and it's just kind of fiction. So I don't like using that word in that context, while the original meaning in the Greek context is correct. So for us, that was the mythos. These stories were ways that we understood ourselves, and as part of tradition that growing up, people knew these stories. It could be either through, not that everyone read the Puranas and the Itihasa, but it was either through grandparents, or there were through the dramatic arts. It was always these stories retold. Nowadays, for many different reasons, we're becoming alienated from this literary heritage. So many of us don't know much more than like the basics of the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, for example. And so, but the thing is, this is still part of our cultural and civilizational DNA. So there's still this thirst and longing, I think, for these stories, and that's why I think there is so much interest in this genre of writing. One of the things as an author that I struggle with, and that I think we as authors have to be very conscious of and responsible about, is that there could be confusion because many people aren't reading the original text, so they could read a fictionalized account and think that that's what was there in our shastras. And so I think we always have to be very careful in distinguishing, what are we taking from the Puranas and the Itihasa, and what are we adding that may be like our own imagination. And I think it's important to preserve the ethos and the worldview and the values that were there in those stories, and preserve that. But finding new ways to narrate that is perfectly fine, and that's what our arts and literary traditions have always done. So I think there is a fine balance there. And so I hope that as authors we'll strive to keep that.
Right. I was in fact reading your book, and I must say it's beautiful how you've given that amount of knowledge. It's beautifully written, and I am very invested in it.
Thank you. That's very kind of you.
Yes. So you said that reading is important for survival. For all those trying to get into reading books, could you talk more on this? And could you talk about how reading has impacted your life?
Sure. So there's actually a book by Lisa Krohn. It's called, I think it's like Wired for Story. And so what this actually talks about is neurologically, if you think about the evolution of human beings, back in the prehistoric times or in the ancient times, we sat around the fire and people would tell, stories to each other. That was done not just for entertainment, but it was actually a way of transmitting knowledge. So, understanding what's out there in the wilderness, learning lessons on, like meaning and purpose and how to survive. So from the very oldest of times, that was there. So it's actually, there's a traditional saying in Hinduism, which is like there are three ways you can learn something. You can learn fire is hot if someone tells you fire is hot. Or you can learn fire is hot if you see someone else getting burned by fire. And then the third way is that you actually get burned by fire. And if we could, we'd want to avoid the third way, right? And so storytelling, by seeing characters go through different experiences that we can relate to, we learn about the world and we learn how to shape ourselves. And so storytelling is not just for entertainment or for pleasure, but it's actually how we learn things about what is the meaning in life, what is our purpose, what makes a good human being, who are our role models, things like that, it shapes our values. And so even though I think, the medium can change, so you can have like reading, or you could have things that are, streaming shows or movies or things like that, but fundamentally we're engaged in storytelling. And that need for storytelling and that importance of storytelling is never going to go away or subside. So even games that people play, video games, have very rich stories behind them. So I know sometimes people say, oh, people aren't reading anymore and things like that, but I think people are still telling and listening to stories, and we should be open to different media for doing so. And I do think there's still something in reading that's different from watching a movie or a TV show, which is that when you're reading, your imagination is actively involved. So you're a participant along with the author. Like an author can never give a full description of what a character looks like. You're imagining it. And so because you're part of it, you're almost part of the author of the story. And so when you finish reading a book, I think you have more of a sense of ownership, or it has a deeper impact than sometimes watching something, because you're so much more actively involved. So I think reading is always going to be important.
Right. Very nicely said, ma'am. Very on point. Following up on this only, what books would you recommend our readers to read, since you're such an avid reader, clearly?
So that's a tough question. I would say one thing that's been enormously helpful for me is Bibek Debroy has been doing translations in English of the Puranas. He's already finished the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, and those are wonderful to read because while there have been other English translations, his are very readable and accessible. It's written just like modern, lucid English prose. And so it opens up a world of literature that for people like me who read primarily English are now able to read. So I highly recommend all of those books. I also like there are just so many different types of books. Like when it comes to fiction, I really enjoyed Ursula Le Guin's books, like the Earthsea series. I think Madeline Miller has a really interesting book on Circe. So it's kind of a similar thing, like taking the ancient Greek myths and then reimagining them. Those are great, but there's just a lot of different books out there. So I just think everyone should read what they enjoy reading. And nowadays you can find so much out there.
Right.
Thank you. Some of the books that you mentioned are my favorites too. I'd like to invite Naina Sagar. She's a theatre personality and she would like to ask you a question. In fact, her next play is also about Parvati, as she mentioned, playing the character of Parvati. So Naina, your question, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi. Good evening. My interest in mythology is primarily because I end up doing a lot of mythological plays, and especially Parvati, the vow of Parvati. I had one specific question for you. I wanted to know when one looks at Parvati vis-a-vis Parvati, I can't actually think about Parvati divorced from the idea of Sati. So I wanted to know, as quality wise, I mean, when one studies, since Sati was supposed to be a previous incarnation of Parvati herself, I wanted to know how adamant, the degree of adamancy. Suppose one looked at Sati, one always thought of Sati being highly adamant as a person. So, how would Parvati compare to her? And is it the same quality in these two ladies, which somehow softens Shiva to a certain extent? Because Shiva is also known to be a very extreme god as far as his inclination, as well as what he's supposed to do in the mortal world is concerned. So that is my question to you.
That's a wonderful question. So in my mind, they are the same in terms of the essential qualities, and when you talk about the adamants in them. So when I think about Sati, for example, I think about when her father is holding this yagya to which neither she nor Shiva have been invited, and she insists on going. And she insists on going because she refuses to accept that her husband will be insulted like this, and that there must be a place for them at this yagya. So in that first instance, even when Shiva asks her not to go, but she insists on going, you see her strength of will. And then when she's at the yagya and she recognizes, she sees how her husband is being insulted. The very act of, when she, she sacrifices her life by putting herself in the yagya, and it's not actually very clear in the Shiva Purana itself whether she immolates herself or she just simply sits and gives up her breath and gives up her life. But she has the tapobala, where basically through will alone she's able to give up her life at that moment. So I think that shows this adamant, this devotion to Shiva, and this strength of will that was in her as Sati. And then when you go to Parvati, so perhaps she doesn't remember this past incarnation of hers, but from a very young age, she has, again, you see these qualities. So one of her names is Uma, because her mother is saying, like, do not go to the forest, stay here with us. But she's always going to the forest, and she takes this vow that she will match Shiva in penance, and she will win him over. And so even other names that she has, like Aparna, because she will not eat other than the leaves that have been discarded, things like that. The incredible asceticism that she goes through, and I think sometimes we mistake this as some kind of like a meekness, which I do not see it that way at all, because it's always her decision, her choice. It's not something that her parents are asking her to do. It's not something that Shiva is asking her to do. She's doing it because she wants that. So that strength of will. And I think what wins Shiva over is, well, Shiva is always won over by sincerity. So he's like, he's pulling up. He's actually easy to win over. So how could he possibly resist Sati or Parvati when they have such pure devotion and love, strength of will, that sheer Shakti in her? Like there's no other match for him or for her. So it's almost inevitable in that sense. So I see them as being the same. It's just that her life continued in two different forms.
Right. Thank you so much. That's a very satisfying answer, actually, because in mythical tales, in mythology, you're always searching for a lot of hidden truths, And this is one of the most interesting answers. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
All the
Thank you.
best for your book. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's very kind of you.
Thank you. There are two more questions from Alka and Babita, which Dia will take up as they are unable to switch on their video. Yes, Dia, please unmute yourself.
Yes. Miss Alka Khanma, she asks, you're an attorney and working for a Fortune 500 company in US. You have studied in Columbia and Yale University. How come did you feel the need to delve into mythology, and how do you feel it is going to impact the current generation?
So I would say that from childhood, I've always loved writing. I've loved creative writing and also reading. And then when I was a child, I really wanted to read. I remember watching the old TV serial they had of the Mahabharata. And I watched that from beginning to end, but I wanted more. Like I wanted to read about about Sri Krishna, about all these devas, and there just wasn't much out there at that time in English. So that was always there. That was a part of me. And actually what happened again, in 2016, my father passed away after an illness of several years. And at that time, I kind of withdrew from the world. And the one thing that gave me solace was writing. So I started taking, creative writing classes again. I started writing. And one day I just wrote like a character sketch about Gandhari. And I was wondering, you have this person who had such a tragic life, some of the tragedy which, she brought on herself. And then she dies in this fire in the forest, and what would she have felt when she was dying? So I wrote like a few pages, and then I built that out into a short story. And then my teacher said, you're actually writing a novel. I think you have to admit to yourself you're actually writing a novel. And it wasn't something I ever really planned on doing, but there was always this passion inside me. And so I knew I wanted to write. And people say you should write what you know. I think the better answer is you should write what you want to know. You should write about what's important to you, because anytime you write a book, you shouldn't write what you know, because that'll be a very boring book to read. So a book isn't worthwhile unless through the process of writing the book, an author finds an answer or finds something out or is surprised herself or himself. And so I think you have to write about what you want to know. So for me, it's like metaphysical questions about the role of the devas, how we connect with them as humans, the meaning and the significance of things that have happened thousands of years ago to today. Those are fundamental questions that are eternal for human nature. And that's really what I want to explore. And because I do have this love for, whether it's Krishna or Shiva, and wanting to explore that and, through writing. And so it comes from a very personal space for me. Where I think it matters for the generation is that, I think we've seen this in the entertainment and in the arts, especially in the West, where there's a lot of focus on representation. So like if you see Netflix nowadays, especially in the US, you're not just going to have white males. And growing up, I became conditioned that always, like when you have the credits, the male actor's name would come first and then the female actors. And you become conditioned to that. And just seeing stories where there's like a woman main character whose name comes first, or seeing someone like myself on the screen, it's very empowering. And I think it's great. And I think the next level of that is not just at the superficial, skin color level, but depicting different metaphysical views. So depicting the world through an Eastern lens or a Hindu lens, because most of the modern storytelling is from a Western lens. So I remember there's this author who writes in America. She had written Sayantani Dasgupta. She was writing a story about an Indian American kid growing up in the US. And in one of the scenes, the kid runs up the stairs with her sneakers on. And then she stopped herself. She said, but that wouldn't happen. Like, no Indian's going to wear shoes inside the house. But we're so conditioned by reading these books like Harry Potter, Percy Jackson. So we kind of just take a lot of that in. But stepping back and thinking, well, there could be a different way of writing. There could be a different way of looking at the world, and bringing that out through literature, I think is very important and crucial for different cultures of the world. And so that's the process I'd like to start, and I'd like to see like a lot of other writers engage in that. So questioning some of these preconceived notions and conditioning that we have. And that's really why I wrote Hindu love stories, because we're so saturated with love stories in a very modern sense. But there's a completely different worldview and perspective from Hindu Dharma, and I want to bring that out. And so I hope a lot more people do this as well.
Very well said. Very well said. And I'm sure a lot of people will get inspiration from this that you just mentioned. Before we move on to the next question, Dia, before you take up Abita's question, and there is a question from Gauri also, which she'll take up directly. I want to give away the second book now. So the question is, which is very easy, but you all know it. All you have to do is fastest finger first. So each and every god in Hinduism, they're represented with their vahan, the vehicle that they travel on. So what were the vahanas of Parvati and Shiva? So the fastest finger first will get the book. So in the meantime, Gauri, you would like to ask the question?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Neeta. Thank you, Dia. And thank you so much, Aditi. You are, I look forward to reading your book. I haven't till now, but I actually, the whole session, I find it very intriguing. So my question to you is, number one, do you believe that the law of attraction, yes, that we read about or we know of, does it have anything to do with the two main characters of your book, which are totally opposite to each other? Opposites attract. Yes. My second question, shall I or just...
Yes, please.
Go ahead,
yeah?
Please.
So my second question would be, since my name is Gauri and I've heard, Shiva is also called with Shankar and Parvati. So do you think that Gauri and Shankar are a different reincarnation of Shiva and Parvati, or is it the same? And if so, are they just different names given to them? And why so? And my third question would be that, do you plan to make a television series of your books? You are a wonderful storyteller. And, the Indian television, it is full of, mythological stories, yes? What is your take on it? How honest the storytellers, when they come to, making a series or a television series, how honest are they in their approach? Do they twist the stories to make their series successful? Or do you think that they are totally honest? Thank you.
Yeah, those are really, really good questions. So I'll start with the first one. Absolutely correct. So there is this law of attraction, or opposites attract, which the first part of the book is really about this. So, Sati is someone, she's very refined. She likes beautiful things. She's very gentle. And then you have Rudra or Shiva, who's in the smashan, who's not bound by convention, has the ganas around him and all of that. And so the first part of the book is really exploring what is the attraction between them, or what's the complementarity. And I think a lot of Dharma or Hinduism is about finding balance. And so sometimes you find balance in relationships, or so, bringing out different aspects of each other. So I think, Sati brings out in Shiva this Somya, or this more gentle aspect. You have Shiva, you have the Shiva Parivar, where you have Shiva and Parvati, Ganesha and Kartik, and then all of their vahanas. So Neeta was asking the question about the vahanas, but what's interesting about their vahanas is that in nature, they would all be inimical to each other. But by being together, being a part of the family, they're actually all in harmony. So there is a lot of esoteric significance to that as well. So I think that's a very large aspect of their relationship. So how having those opposite characteristics can help bring out different aspects of them. On your second question, so I don't consider them different incarnations per se. I think they're different aspects. So, it's like each of our prominent devas have like a sahasranama, which is like 1,000 names to describe this one form, this one nama rupa. And each of those names has like a particular imagery associated with it, particular qualities associated with it. And every time you recite one of those names, you're imbibing those qualities. And I think what's very good about that is that our devas aren't just one thing, they're not just simple, right? So you have someone like Sati, who is she's Gauri and she's Kali and she's Durga. She's the Devi in the form of a crone, and then she's a Devi in the form of a young child. And each of these has different qualities, different energies associated with it. And that, I think, encourages us to also be multifaceted, multidimensional, not just be one thing. And I think for women especially, that's very important. And so I think what's the beauty of having so many different names that refer to Shiva and to Devi is that you can meditate on, you can invoke all these different energies and qualities that we all need to be well developed and complete, and we need around us in the world. And so I think the different names just remind us of all of those. And they're not different entities or different incarnations, but just different aspects of this one, this one being, in a sense. And then on your last question, so actually for the vow of Parvati, this has been optioned for serialization. That doesn't mean it will happen, but a producer has bought the option. Writing a book is very different than writing for a serial. So I always feel like I think good serials are based on good books. So my hope is just to continue working on writing good books, hopefully, and then if it gets picked up, it does or it doesn't. I think not just in the mythological area, but in general with the OTT, there's a lot of focus on sensationalization. I think there's this feeling that you have to write things that are very extreme or or shocking to get eyeballs, and I think a lot of times that does take away from honesty or authenticity. I think sometimes we underestimate audiences. So like a subtle, well-told story, I still think will get a lot of, can be successful. So I think we have to challenge that. And I hope we see different kinds of storytelling that aren't just sensationalist for the sake of being sensationalist come out, because I think we'd all be the better for it.
Thank you so much, Aditi. I look forward to a series from you, which is as honest as you. And thank you so much. All the best for your series and your book. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Neeta.
Thank you. Yes, one of the questions which came in, Aditi, was also that, this is the last question to you, that who do you foresee in the role of Lord Shiva in case your book is made into a web series?
I can't, I can't really imagine that. So no one comes to mind. My hope would be, it was always the tradition that, if there was going to be like a play or a drama, that before that, there's usually like a puja or like some sadhana done before that to invoke the character, before taking that on. So there's, I believe in South India, there's a tradition of reenacting the story of Draupadi. And I believe that the actors who take on the role, they actually go to a temple to ask for forgiveness for some of the acts that they're going to have to depict, because they take it to be so real. So I hope that whoever would play Shiva or Parvati would have that kind of respect and reverence for playing these characters who are divinities, and do some of that sadhana or some of those prayers and that worship to kind of bring about those qualities or to prepare them for the roles. That would be my one hope, versus having anyone particular in mind for any of those roles.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I must admit, I absolutely loved your book, and 2 lucky winners for your book. In fact, I could only decide one because, okay, I have answers to Not tiger, Gauri, it was lion, but it's okay, we'll give you the answer. So the lucky winners of your book are Gauri Mehendiratha and Priya Vashisht, and congratulations to both the winners. I'm sure you'll enjoy the book, and the rest of you must order the book on Amazon, and it is available all over. And it's been published by Bloomsbury. In fact, a big thanks to them for putting this session together, which I really enjoyed, and I'm sure all of us did. And thank you, Aditi, for being on our forum. It was such a pleasure to have you as our 96th guest.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed everyone's questions, and Neeta and Dia, it's always such a pleasure being in conversation with people who've read the book and have read it so carefully. So as an author, that's a particular delight. So I really appreciate that. So thank you for taking the time to read it and ask very thoughtful questions. I very much appreciate that.
Thank you so much. Any last thoughts you want to share, or we can close the session, right? Any last thoughts on the book that we've missed out sharing?
No, I think we've covered everything. So I just thank you everyone for attending and for all the wonderful questions. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you for the enlightening session, and thank you for all the guests who've joined in on the Zoom and on the YouTube, and the recording of this session will be available on our YouTube channel. You can always like, comment, share, and go through the recording once again. And thank you for being here today. Good night.